The sound of glass shattering wasn't loud, it was delicate, like something surrendering. I had just rinsed the champagne flute and was turning toward the drying rack when it slipped from my hand and kissed the floor in pieces. The chatter from the patio didn't pause. Laughter spilled through the open doors, trailing behind the scent of mimosa and citrus. I bent down slowly, brushing the shards into a dustpan with a trembling hand. That's when I heard her heels, sharp, fast approaching like punctuation. Vesper burst into the kitchen, flawless in her white linen dress and too bright lipstick. "What did you do now?" she snapped. "I dropped a glass," I said, barely above a whisper. She raised her hand not to hit me, no, but in that stiff, silencing way she always used when she needed control. "You should know your place," she hissed. "You don't belong in this kitchen during my events." I stood up straight, the dustpan still in my hand. My back ached, but I didn't show it. "You think just because you're old, you're entitled. That living here means you can float around like some relic." Her voice cracked slightly but recovered. "Get out. Now. Or I swear I'll call the cops." For a moment, everything went still. The ceiling fan whirred. The birds outside chirped. I looked at her, really looked, and saw no hesitation. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't ask where this was coming from, or remind her of, the day she first kicked in that very kitchen wall with her toddler foot, while I painted the cabinets. I just nodded. I placed the dustpan down. I wiped my hands. I walked out the back door without a word. The garden greeted me like an old friend. The rosemary bushes were overgrown, and the daisies leaned toward the sun. I had planted them when Julian was still alive. From the patio, I heard laughter continue. Someone said, "Is everything okay in there?" And Vesper responded with a cheerful, "Just a little mess handled." I kept walking past the roses, past the cracked stepping stone I never replaced, until the sound of their glasses clinking was too far to reach me. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't coming back through that door. It was the fall of 1981, when Julian and I found it, a lopsided Victorian on the edge of Napa Valley. Faded blue paint, peeling off like dried petals. The front porch leaned. The floorboards creaked in protest. But Julian ran his hand over the banister and grinned like a boy seeing treasure in the dirt. "It's got bones," he said. "Good ones." We put down every cent we had, skipped any thought of a honeymoon, and moved in with just our clothes, a borrowed mattress, and 2 chipped coffee mugs. We slept on the floor the first month, waking up to hammering sounds from the neighbors renovating their own place. Julian said the neighborhood was catching fire, and we were striking the first match. We painted the walls ourselves, sunflower yellow in the kitchen, a soft green in the hallway. I stitched curtains out of old linen. He fixed the broken steps while humming Sinatra off-key. In winter, we filled the house with the smell of cinnamon and bread. We had no dishwasher, no air conditioning, and only one bathroom that worked properly. But we had light. We had music. And when Vesper was born, we had joy. She took her first steps in the living room on a Thursday morning. I remember the dust motes floating in the air like tiny fireflies as she tottered toward me, bare feet slapping against the hardwood. Julian clapped so hard he scared her into my arms. That house watched us grow. It listened to every birthday song, every midnight whisper, every whispered apology. When Julian got sick, we brought his bed downstairs so he wouldn't have to climb the stairs. I read to him from that frayed recliner until he slipped into sleep, and then silence. After he passed, I kept calling it our castle even when the roof leaked and the furnace groaned. It was never about the structure. It was about the history in the walls, the kind you can't replicate with granite countertops or recessed lighting. It stayed mine even after I left. What I didn't say, not even to Vesper, was that the deed always stayed in my name. After Julian passed, the house felt too quiet. Even the creaks in the floorboards seemed more hollow without him. I stayed for 5 more years, clinging to the rhythms we had created. But eventually, loneliness pressed too hard against the windows. That's when Vesper made the offer. "It'll be better for both of us," she said over dinner, her hand resting lightly on mine. "You won't be alone anymore. And we've got plenty of room now." I hesitated. The house was still mine, but it felt like living inside an echo, I boxed up the china we only used on holidays, folded Julian's shirts one last time, and handed the keys to a rental manager with a tight smile. Then I moved into the guest room at Vespers. At first, it was gentle. Ansel helped carry my bookshelves up the stairs. Vesper made me tea in the evenings. She asked about my favorite recipes and even laughed when I told her I still used the same measuring spoons from 1968. But the warmth didn't last. The first rule came the following week. No garlic in the kitchen, it lingered too long. Then came the request to keep the volume down after 8 p.m., and later the suggestion that I skip inviting my church friend over. It's just, the house is our sanctuary, Vesper explained, her tone clipped and clinical. We all need boundaries. The living room became off limits unless no one else was using it. My pots were removed from the patio one morning without warning. I found them tucked behind the trash bins, their soil still damp. The mailbox once bearing Ravel Winthrop was changed. It now read the Ravels. My name was erased without so much as a mention. In the guest room, I kept my clock, my shawl, and a single framed photo of Julian. Everything else, my routines, my stories, my place in the world, felt like it had been packed away. I wasn't family anymore. I was a convenience, a helper, a relic politely set aside. And I stayed quiet, at least for a while, until the night I heard what she really thought of me. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I had come down for a glass of water quietly, carefully as always. The hallway was dark, but the living room was still lit. Vesper and Ansel were sitting on the couch, wine glasses in hand, voices, low but clear enough to carry. She's just always there, Vesper said. Her tone wasn't cruel, just tired, like emotional clutter. It's exhausting. Ansel didn't argue. He just made a soft noise of agreement. I stood in the shadows, holding the glass I never filled. My chest felt tight, not with anger, but with that familiar ache that only words like those can bring. Emotional clutter, a stain you couldn't scrub out, a box you meant to donate but never got around to. I backed away before they could see me, returned to my room, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stared at the floor and let the words arrange themselves into something I could not forget. Later that week, they had guests for dinner, 2 of Ansel's co-workers and their wives. I spent the day roasting chicken, chopping herbs, setting the table with linen napkins and the good plates. When the meal was served, one of the women complimented the food. "This is amazing," she said, smiling. "Did you make it, Vesper?" "Oh God, no," Vesper replied with a laugh that sounded just a touch too loud. "That's our live-in freeloaders' work." The table fell quiet for a second. One of the men chuckled, unsure if it was a joke. I smiled, small and pleasant, and excused myself to the kitchen before dessert. I stood at the sink rinsing dishes that no one would thank me for washing and felt something click into place. Not loudly, not suddenly, but with the steady pressure of something permanent. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the ease with which she said them, the comfort, the ownership. I had taught my daughter to speak. She had learned how to use her voice. I had simply forgotten to teach her what not to do with it. But I remembered something she didn't know I still had. It started with a folder, sleek navy blue and zipped shut like a secret. Vesper placed it on the kitchen table one afternoon while I folded dish towels. Her smile was practiced tight. "I need a favor," she said, sitting across from me like a banker about to pitch a loan. "It's just a refinance thing, some paperwork, to help with taxes and future planning." She tapped the folder. "All it needs is your signature." I reached for it, slowly opened it, and skimmed the top page. Her name was already typed where mine should have been. "I'd still live here, of course," she added quickly. "Nothing changes. It's just for efficiency." My thumb rested on the corner of the paper, but I didn't flip to the next page. I looked at her instead. I saw her press her lips together the same way she did when she thought someone was being unreasonable. "I don't think that's necessary," I said, folding the towel a little more tightly than usual. Vesper leaned back in her chair, her smile cracking like paint. She stood and left the room without another word. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, the phone rang. A woman from the bank had a few clarifying questions about a mortgage application tied to my old address. My address! I sat very still, letting her speak. Then I asked her to send me a copy. She hesitated, but I must have sounded more composed than most women my age. Later that day, the envelope arrived. Inside were pages of forged documents, my daughter's signature claiming full ownership, stating I had transferred authority to her years ago. That night, after Vesper and Ansel went to bed, I pulled my suitcase from the closet. I unzipped the inner lining and retrieved a manila envelope. Inside was the deed. Julian's signature, my name, ownership since 1981, no transfer, no handover. I had tucked it away years ago, not because I distrusted her then, but because something told me not to let go too easily. Now I knew why. At 3:00 a.m., the house was still. I moved carefully, letting the zipper of my old suitcase hum low and slow. I packed only what I needed, 2 changes of clothes, my toothbrush, Julian's wedding band, the deed, and the photograph of us in front of the porch the day we bought the house. I didn't take the clock. I didn't take the knit blanket or the teacups I loved. I left them on purpose. Some things are meant to stay behind. In the kitchen, I paused. The lights were off, but moonlight spilled in through the window above the sink, painting silver onto the granite Vesper insisted on upgrading. I reached into my apron pocket and unfolded the note I had written earlier that evening. I set it gently beside the porcelain teapot she never once touched. It read, Vesper, I'm done asking for space in a home I paid for with my life. Clemence, I didn't add love or goodbye. There was no need. The front door creaked softly as I opened it. I winced, but no one stirred. I slipped out, shutting it behind me without a sound, and walked down the front steps with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. The sidewalk felt cool beneath my shoes. The trees lining the street whispered overhead, leaves rustling like quiet applause. I passed the garden I once kept. Now wild, but still blooming, in places where Vesper had forgotten to dig out the roots. At the end of the block, I reached the motel, the kind with flickering lights and no frills where no one asks your name if you pay in cash. I slid the money across the counter, took the key, and closed the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, let the stillness settle, then reached for the card I had carried in my wallet since Julian's funeral. Corliss Ellery, my husband's best friend, our lawyer. The one man who never spoke to me like I was a shadow. I dialed. Clemence, he answered, groggy. I need to talk, I said. And by morning, I had a plan. Corliss met me at his kitchen table, just like he used to when Julian and I came by after church. The same mugs, the same scent of lemon polish and old books. He pushed his glasses up his nose, skimmed the deed, the tax records, and the forged application I had received from the bank. She doesn't have a leg to stand on, he said, tapping the paper. You own this house outright, Clemence. No liens, no transfer, no shared title. It's yours. I nodded, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt clear. I want to sell, I told him. Quietly. No sign in the yard, no open house. Just someone serious who'll love it. Corliss smiled soft and approving. I know just the person to help. He made the call that afternoon. Inez Lowen met me an hour later at a small realty office tucked behind a cafe. She had grown taller since the last time I saw her years ago, when she was still a teenager hanging around the library after school, scribbling poetry in the margins of her math book. I had once helped her apply for a summer scholarship. Now she shook my hand with confidence and didn't ask for an explanation. I'll handle it personally, she said. We met outside the house at noon. I waited in the car while Inez walked the property, took discreet photos, and made notes. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. Not yet. By 2:00, the listing was live. No address disclosed. Just photos. Words that sounded nothing like Vesper's vocabulary, charming, character-filled, lovingly maintained by original owner. By 4:00, Inez called me. We have 3 offers already, all above asking. I reviewed them with quiet precision. The first was a tech investor looking for a retreat space. The second, a pair of flippers numbers people. The third was from a woman named Thora Farrow, divorced, middle-aged, all cash. She'd written a note. I'm ready to start over. I'm not afraid of what's already lived in these walls. I'd be honored to add to their story. I signed before sunset. My hand didn't shake. By 8:30 the next morning, the envelope arrived, hand-delivered by courier to the doorstep of the house I no longer called home. Inside, the transfer of ownership notarized and irreversible. Thora Farrow was now the legal owner of the property at 1743 Juniper Lane, effective immediately. Accompanying it was the notice to vacate. 7 days. The return name wasn't Mom. It wasn't even Clements. It was Winthrop. Sharp and plain like the sound of a closing door. I didn't witness what happened next, but I imagined it clearly. Vesper reading the documents twice, then 3 more times looking for an error. Ansel asking once, "Is this real?" then saying nothing more. The silence between them stretching thin like old wallpaper. By noon, my phone had rung 10 times. By dinner, 23. No voicemails. Just her name lighting up the screen in a loop of disbelief and panic. I turned the ringer off and let the silence settle. Inez texted updates. She tried to dispute the sale. I told her the records were final. Then after a pause, "She didn't seem to know you still owned the house." Of course she didn't. By Wednesday, the neighbors had noticed. Cars slowed near the driveway. Sprinklers turned off mid-cycle as someone lingered near a hedge. Whispers carried through cul-de-sacs. "Did you hear? Kicked out." By her own mother. I thought that house was in her name. Even the mailman must have heard by then. Ansel packed in silence. I imagined the sound of drawers sliding, the soft thud of closet doors closing. Vesper didn't post anything online. She didn't know how to frame it. The next time the phone buzzed, I watched the screen without reaching for it. I let it ring, then disappear. She didn't leave a message, only called again 30 minutes later. Each time felt less urgent, more hollow. I pictured her standing in the center of the house, surrounded by boxes she didn't want to fill, wondering how it all slipped out from under her. By Friday, even Ansel had left. He took a single suitcase and didn't look back. It was just after dusk when the intercom buzzed. I was seated at the small kitchen table in my new apartment, tea, cooling in front of me, the mint leaves pressed gently to the bottom of the cup. I glanced at the screen on the wall. Vesper stood outside the gate, shoulders hunched, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. No makeup. Her coat was too thin for the weather. She looked smaller somehow, less certain of her own outline. She pressed the call button again. Her voice crackled through the speaker. "Mom, please, I have nowhere to go." I didn't move. I just watched. "I know you're there," she said. "I made mistakes. I know that. But you didn't have to. You didn't have to do this." Her voice broke on the last word. She looked up at the building, scanning the rows of lit windows, like she didn't remember which one belonged to me. I stepped onto the balcony and leaned slightly over the railing. Her eyes found me immediately. Hope bloomed fast on her face, too fast. She took a step forward, lifting a hand as if I might reach down and pull her into warmth again. "Please," she called, her voice hoarse. "Just for tonight. Just until I figure something out." I let the silence sit between us. Let her feel what it was like to beg into a space that had no reply. She looked so much like herself at 5 years old, hands clasped, eyes wide, waiting for a yes. That version of her had once clung to my leg during storms and whispered that I was her safest place. That version had been gone a long time. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Don't ever think you can trick an old woman," I said, just loud enough for her to hear, especially your own mother. Her face crumpled. I stepped back. I closed the balcony door behind me, drew the curtain, and sat at my table again. Outside, I heard the faint echo of her footsteps fading into the night. The mint is thriving. It always does in the morning when the sun hasn't quite decided whether it's bold or soft. I brush my fingers across the leaves and lift them to my nose. The scent reminds me of the garden I once kept. Before the rules. Before the silence. Beside it, a pot of rosemary leans toward the light. I planted it the week after the sale closed, just days after I moved in. My hands were sore from boxes and years of restraint, but digging in the soil, however shallow, felt like breathing again. I carry my mug out to the balcony and sit in the worn teak chair I found secondhand. I sip slowly. Mint tea, just the way Julian liked it. The cup warms my palms, and for the first time in a long while, I feel entirely within my own skin. Behind me, the phone rings. I don't need to check. I know the sound of Vesper's name when it lights up the screen. It has rung more times than I've counted this week. She never leaves messages, just calls. Always at odd hours, like she's hoping I'll answer by accident or out of muscle memory. I don't pick up. I don't even turn around. It's not anger, I feel. It isn't triumph either. It's the kind of quiet that settles in when the noise has drained away. The kind that fills the corners instead of echoing in them. The kind you wait a lifetime to earn. I look out over the city. The towers just beginning to catch light, the streets still blinking into life. Somewhere below, lives begin again. Mine already has. In the kitchen, the kettle whistles. I let it. I let everything take its time. The phone rings once more. I let it finish untouched. I close my eyes and feel the wind stir the mint again, crisp and green. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I signed. And that was louder than anything my daughter ever said.